All right, welcome to another episode of Business Digitally Live. We are here today with Andrew Blaney and David McKinsey from Elaborate in Australia. And I'm not sure where exactly you're in Australia, Melbourne, or in different
Melbourne.
cities, actually. Melbourne, both of you. Great. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Just give a little bit of introduction about both of you. And Andrew is basically the founder of Remote Agility Framework as well as Elaborate. And he is basically leading a company which is leading in agile consultancy in the region, as well as he's an expert in strategy, organization design, and complex facilitation and adaptive leadership. David is actually also the co-author of Remote Agility Framework and is heading the commercial partnerships. He has more experience in non-IT settings, and he follows a pragmatic approach to solving complex problems. Welcome, guys. So, first of all, I would love to open up with the question and the idea of remote working, right? Since we are on the remote working topic, so give us a background on how this remote working thing works. And what sort of experience you've seen in your world?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll start and then I'll hand over to you, Dave.
Sure.
Yeah, so I probably started my professional career a couple of decades ago, working in the lounge room of a mate, building websites for a tourism company in Australia. I then went overseas and I spent a couple of years in London working in digital agencies before I came back and did a couple of key programs of work, some consulting. I was on a big program of work at one of our telecoms that was a multi-billion-dollar program of work, which I think Dave is very familiar with. And also did a major banking transformation program. And I went from working in sort of hybrid Scrum XP environments in digital onto these massive programs that had teams all over the world that were largely driven by the transfer of documents between people. And my role on those programs was kind of reduced to being a document monkey. So I'd kind of write a document and then I'd be put in charge of managing that document for the next period of time whilst the program was replanned and reorganized. And we went from release 1 and release 2 to release 1A and release 1B and then to release 1A.1 and 1A.2. And all you'd basically do was recraft documents for a living. So yeah, lots of experience with working with distributed teams there, distributed in different cities, distributed remote in different countries. Then I moved, I founded a consultancy called Elaborate, as you mentioned. And the aim of that was basically to help create high-performance teams and high-performance cultures through the use of agile frameworks and also agile principles. Over the last decade, we've worked with lots and probably hundreds of organizations, and there's been so many different configurations. We've got fully remote teams. We've got teams that are partially distributed. So you might have one team in one country, one team in the other, with a nice big screen in the middle of them. We've had major programs where teams are distributed all over the place. And obviously ourselves as an organization, being in 4 different states, leadership was fairly distributed as well. So but we've got a fair bit of experience in what makes remote work good, and also lots and lots of experience in building high performance cultures. And I suppose that's the nexus of those two things was the genesis for Remote AF. Maybe Dave, if you want to add something.
Oh, look, no, my journey started a long time ago now with one of Australia's leading telcos, working on the program that Andrew was talking about, nationwide, based in Melbourne. So I started sort of my project delivery experience and journey at the same time as I started my working with remote teams journey. And during my time at that company, working through the whole range and the whole gamut of project delivery roles the whole way through. But Manoj, you mentioned I mostly with non-IT teams, so working in IT operational spaces and business operations spaces, and helping them bridge the gap between the delivery teams and those business operations. So again, not only were the teams distributed and remote across all of Australia and sometimes internationally. We had partners in India, but also across business lines. So across bridging the business and IT frontier, sometimes you could probably describe it as. And that sort of brought me closer to those teams that started going through that agile journey and understanding how these things connect together and how the teams need to work together in such a way that you can actually drive outcomes that are beneficial to everyone. So that's sort of my passion area and my background, and it's all kind of all rolled into one. That sort of the distributed nature of teams and the distributed types of teams and all that sort of stuff. So that's kind of my background. When I jumped across to Elaborate, I think Blaney and I touched base and went, hang on, we worked on that program together, and it was a 6 degrees of separation sort of a moment, which was very interesting. Yeah.
I'm certainly not missing the conference calls. Like it is so much easier to do things in 2020 than it was in 2010. The tools were just, they weren't there back then. You just sat on conference calls and listened to people click clack on the other end and knew they weren't listening.
You're on mute, Manoj. There we go.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, I think it's quite eye-opening that how things actually have in the last 6 months at least, given the scenario and the world we are living in right now, how easy it has become in many aspects to work remotely, right? I mean, the tools are available and more so than before. And so that's a good segue into understanding, like, what prompted you, Andrew, and also David, to get into the mix of having, because we already have so many frameworks available in the market today, right? If you look at it from an agility standpoint, and on top of that, having another framework for agility, especially remote, it does make sense. But what was the intention behind it?
Yeah, I could probably talk to that. I actually spoke at Agile Australia circles today.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the privilege of seeing Dave Snowden and Simon Wardley together at a deep dive that Rachel Slattery organised through Agile Australia a couple of years back, which fundamentally changed my understanding of strategy. So Simon's Wardley maps are a really interesting way to look at the world. And I also love Dave's Apex Predator theory, which kind of adds some points of tension into that model that I think are quite interesting. So when we were looking at the models in January for COVID coming out of Wuhan, I had some ex-colleagues who were working in China at the time and talking about the difficulties that working in China which has some pretty limited telecoms infrastructure in places. But they were kind of talking about some of the challenges, people kind of moving back to WhatsApp to communicate and that kind of thing. And basically, I was thinking, all right, well, we run a 100-person consultancy that does largely work on site. A lot of our customers expected our people to be on site. What sort of risk does this present to us as an organisation, and therefore, what's the strategic response? One of the things that Simon said and continues to say is that novel situations mean that capital flows to problems. So what we have with the pandemic is basically all this capital flowing to the problem of how to make remote working effective. There's kind of two types of capital there. There's the financial capital, which is flowing in. So people are investing in new platforms. They're improving existing platforms, and there's a lot of things in beta testing that look really cool right now that could make a big difference down the track. But there's also the intellectual capital that's been thrown at the problem, and I think that's the big one. So you've got students learning how to remote learn, parents learning how to teach their kids remotely, teachers teaching remotely. You've got all demographics in organisations that can't be directly on the tools, having to work remotely in some fashion, and even in the in aged care homes and places where the elderly are placed. You've got carers in there trying to teach people how to communicate with their families. I was Skyping with my grandma up until last week. It wasn't easy, but like there's all that learning happening. So we've got this basically all this intellectual capital coupled with the financial capital, which is pushing remote working over the chasm. It was very much an early adopter thing. It was the idea of working from anywhere was the kind of thing that heretics would be accused of spouting. All this capital has just shifted it into the mainstream, and regardless of what people think, it's not going to go back. We will be in some form of hybrid or remote workforce mode if we can be for a long time into the future. So with that knowledge, we kind of said, all right, well, what's the right strategic move? I've got a massive interest in trying to do something from a sustainability perspective. I want to create great workplaces. That's where my focus has been for the last 10 years. A hyper-effective remote working framework seemed like a really great nexus of a bunch of interests, which also was very timely. And look, we don't want to replace the agile frameworks that are out there. They are amazing. We love them. What we do want to do is kind of provide tools and patterns and frameworks and techniques for organizations that want to get really, really good at the stuff you need to be effective in the remote context.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting concept. When we landed with COVID is the old saying is necessity is the mother of all invention. And you start to see a lot of people and starting to feel the experience of, hang on, we're going to be at home, we're going to be in a distributed setting. What are we going to do about it, or how are we going to manage it? And my first experiences was we were doing the same things as we always did. We just did them on video conference, and we thought we were going to get better results or different results. And it turned out to just be incredibly tiring. I don't think anyone's not experienced that Zoom burnout, I think is the term that's being coined at the moment. So it was a great opportunity to say, well, we've got as an elaborate perspective, years of experience. Ultimately, in the consultancy is a distributed organization, so we've got this experience that we can use and leverage to try and help organizations work more effectively in a remote setting, and that's what sort of underpinned a lot of the thinking behind it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, we just have a question which is popping on the screen right now. And Mike actually is one of my co-hosts. He's asking a question about the responsibilities we see from companies, right? And also the state of the companies as well. Like how does that affect the remote working?
That's political, isn't it? Great question, Mike. First and foremost, I see that we've got a bit of a design challenge that's going to present itself. So I think the shift of a lot of people into remote working is going to reduce the rental tenancies in the CBD, and particularly in the corridor areas, which is a good thing in a lot of ways, but it's also going to create some challenges. So there'll be some city design challenges. How do we renew the CBD? There'll be some regional design challenges, and then you've got the whole issue of there's kind of two issues from an infrastructure perspective. There's the telecommunications infrastructure, and lots of different countries tackle that problem in lots of different ways. We're pretty fortunate in Australia that we've got a central provider of the backbone infrastructure, which kind of makes it meant that it was a little bit smoother for us than potentially for some other countries that have lots of different providers providing the backbone, and that kind of becomes an integrated whole. There's the second one is kind of who's responsible for making sure that the household is safe. Who's responsible for making sure that that people that have ergonomic desks to work at. I've seen a startup in that space, kind of that's coming out of the States at the moment, which is about how do we get people set up quickly and cost effectively, and make sure that they're meeting occupational health and safety regulations. And the final one is how do we make sure that we're not sort of shifting the balance for environmental sustainability and safety and all those things away from the employer and onto the employee. The last thing we want to do is create a framework that makes organisations really effective, but costs their employees money and doesn't. And means that those organisations are no longer taking responsibility for things that they used to in terms of the environment.
Right. I mean, I think before I take on another question, there's another question from Mike. I want to go into a little bit more in depth about the operating model and design, right? That within a remote agility framework, you also have something called the operating model design, which is sort of gives you sort of a cadence, right, on in terms of how the operating model can be contextually built for the organization that you're working, and how the ways of working can be changed or improved, right? Yep. I'm not sure, like, if David or Andrew, whoever wants to cover that.
Yeah, but I suppose I should speak to that one. Look, the big thing that we've seen is that organizations have just shifted into remote working mode without changing anything about their operating model. And if you've worked in organizations where you've kind of gone quasi-agile, but you've still got functional leadership, so in the IT context, you might have a cross-functional team, but all the team members report up to different functional managers. Now, on an office floor setting, you can see the mess that creates. Information flows to authority, so you have all of these people in all of these meetings trying to get their head around what's going on. It's barely functional in a co-located environment. It is completely dysfunctional in a remote environment. So the operating model design framework that we've built into Remote AF is really about trying to surface the context and get people to make really informed decisions about teaming models and about interactions between teams. We found some kindred spirits in Matt and Manuel from Team Topologies who are looking at similar things, but what we're really interested in is understanding strategy, understanding the customer, understanding the supply chain, understanding the unique constraints in your context, and then iterating towards an operating model design that helps you to most effectively deliver to your strategy and your customers given your supply chain constraints. My other really key vision with that is that we shift away from doing big changes irregularly to doing small operating model changes regularly. So you basically build the operating model design approach into your strategic cadence. So strategy, operating model design, planning, rather than strategy planning, blow the whole thing up, which I think is hopefully a much more humane and effective way to look at that part of organizational design.
Right. Anything to add to that, David?
I think it just ties into the mind around building that agility. I mean, we're all from an agility background. We understand cutting things smaller releases, but more frequently. And it's thinking of your organization from a business agility perspective in the same way is smaller changes, smaller adaptation, smaller releases to your op model, smaller tweaks on a faster cadence so you can adapt really rapidly to the changing environment that is happening. As we sort of spend more and more time in organizations, 15, 20 years ago, the market didn't change so much. In the digital world and the world we're seeing now, obviously it's just exponentially faster. So there's more competitors, there's more opportunity for entry into the market, which means you've got more challenges. So you need to be able to adapt faster. And ultimately, if you are not able to adapt not only your strategy, but the way you deliver your strategy and the way you're organized, then you're going to struggle to meet that demand. And then hopefully they don't, but if you struggle enough, your customers potentially start to move other places.
So related to this, I think there's another question I'll take from Mike, which he's talking about what do facilitators, but also participants need to learn so to make remote really work?
Yeah, I might jump on that one. So that's not all Andrew starting. I think there's a few key things we can sort of call out. I come back to the first sort of idea that if we're doing the same thing as we always did on face-to-face, and we move that to a video setting, the results just are not going to be the same. We lose that interaction aspect. We lose that in-person sort of seeing people's body language, hearing their tones, seeing how they move, how they sit on their chair, how they interact with the group, sort of what they do with their hands. And that's assuming we can see them on video. It's very easy in a remote setting where people can zone out and they can just turn their video off, or hopefully as a facilitator, it's not going so bad and they say, oh, my internet's not working, and they drop off completely. That's not a scenario we want. So the first thing is really from a facilitation perspective is understand that what we used to do is maybe not going to be as effective in person. And then we start thinking about, okay, well, what's that actually mean? So we want to start focusing the time we spend on our video calls into the things that are actually the most valuable. So what remote or distributed gives us the capability to do is actually do asynchronous and synchronous communication. So we can start to focus the time we spend together on video and the actual facilitation to be more around discussion, more around activity, more around collaboration, as opposed to data gathering. So that's maybe the first thing from a facilitator perspective to call out. The flip side is, as a facilitator, is that's actually harder to facilitate. So we spend more time planning, we spend more time organizing, we spend more time setting the structures up for the sessions and the workshops that we're running to make sure they run really well. From an attendee's perspective or participant's perspective, the first rule is always be engaged, sort of get involved. Obviously, that doesn't change in a remote setting, but I think probably the first call out is if our facilitators are really driving home the synchronous versus synchronous and asynchronous engagement for the workshop or the session we're running, then I think it's a realization that you as a participant, there's potentially going to be more work up front. So you're part of the planning, you're part of the preparation process as well. So we can spend the time in session around discussions, around collaboration, around collaborating to build actions or the like, depending on what your workshop's for. And then potentially you've got follow-on that comes out of it as well. So we want to minimize that in-session time so we don't get burnout from video conferencing. So you're more involved in the prep. You want to have, so you can have that good time on video to be discussing, and then you've probably got a little bit more to do outside of it. Whereas in person, we would just run a 2-hour big workshop. We would do it all in one big thing. And that sort of made life a little bit different. So it's that purposeful design and how you think about your workshops is the big change from a facilitator's perspective.
So jumping onto the current, crisis that we are dealing with, in your recent experience, like have you seen like this being very effective in remote working with your current clients, or any recent experience that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I've over the last few months actually, working with a couple of companies here in Australia, both, not all in Melbourne, distributed. One's in Sydney, so one's a telco company, the other is a gaming company, and helping them basically decompose their strategy through to the team plans. And what we're really trying to do is, it's easy, well, it's never easy to develop strategy, I appreciate that, but what becomes really hard is to take the strategy that's set for an organization and then get it in such a way that the teams that are actually consuming the work, that are delivering the work, that are releasing it, actually have that really strong alignment. So we built a pattern that I've been using with these couple of companies around helping them decompose that strategy and maintain alignment and connection all the way through the teams, but doing it in a remote setting. That's our all hands planning pattern. And what we're really finding is a couple of really great things that are calling out. There's that prep work that I talked about, but we do that in such a way that the teams are actually using that time together to plan at scale, but have really strong next level conversations. So they're actually able to start to understand not only dependencies between work, which is a pretty important thing to find out, but start to then say, well, what are the flow and impacts? What happens when we prioritize in one way and the other team doesn't? How do we sequence our work properly? What's the associated risk across the entire program? So you start to see this next level conversation. The really great thing that comes out of it, though, is because we use virtual tools, because we use the communication channels we've got available to us, we're actually able to have living documents. So what would normally happen in person is we would use whiteboards, or we would use some other method or a spreadsheet or something, or post-it notes written on a board, and we'd kind of lose the dynamic nature of it. In a remote setting, when you run through these things, you actually have a living organism at the end of it that you're actually using on a day-to-day basis to actually maintain and track and maintain an alignment of that work that flows through. So you get this really strong ideal of transparency for the work. So the teams that are actually part of it are understanding that how that strategy breaks down, how they bring it into themselves, so they can see that alignment. They understand then they've got that purpose, or we know what we're going to be doing now and why it's important. But also you've got something that they're actually able to continuously refer back to. So it's this board that they can go and see, and they can touch, and they can move, and they can actually see all the connectivity between it. So there's real sorts of benefits from that transparency and awareness and alignment piece, plus something that is they're able to use on an ongoing basis for collaboration, for knowledge sharing, for alignment, which becomes really powerful for them.
Yeah, I might add to that, Manoj. There's a lot of the research is showing that the organisations that have adopted agility and are a fair way along the journey, this has been a lot easier for those organisations than it has been for organisations that aren't there. So it is, when you have those teams with bounded autonomy, when you have that idea of kind of the teams being able to pick up something and complete it independently, and having all the functions within the team to do that, where you've got the frameworks for continuous delivery or continuous integration or good test automation coverage. Those patterns have made organizations slip into this pretty easily. Where there's some bigger challenges are in the operational teams of organizations, and I'm not talking about IT operations there. It's the finance operations, the people operations teams, the customer operations teams. It's pretty easy to motivate a group of people if you've got a good sense of purpose and a goal that's challenging, and you need to do knowledge work and solve problems in order to get there. It's a different leadership challenge when you've got people in operational roles who've got demand to chunk through, and the demand is a little bit more predictable in terms of what has to be done with it, so procedural work and that kind of thing. So one of the other things that we're really focusing in on is how do we make life easier for both those teams and the leaders of those teams.
Brilliant. Now, we've been talking a lot about strategy and also, hands-on planning around that, right? And looking at somewhere, I actually would like to see what are the key results and objectives that are set. So as a team, when you know, like when you're actually making some strides, or either when you're being successful or not, right? So how does planning and strategy go hand in hand together in this remote environment? Because it's much easier to do when you are actually obviously working as a team in some place, but otherwise the planning aspect and the strategy aspect, how does that work in this case, especially when you're working remote?
Yeah, maybe if I start with the kind of the more enduring aspects of strategy, and then you can talk about the stuff that's done on cadence, Dave.
Yep.
Yeah, look, so I think the most effective organisations at the moment are the ones that have been able to craft a statement of intent that that motivates multiple levels of multiple stages of adult development. So a lot of us start out getting our sense of self from tribal belonging. We might add to that we get a real kick out of being an expert or a master in something. We might augment that with a real sense of achievement when we complete something of magnitude, and then kind of you keep wrapping these layers around yourself as you grow as an adult, to the point where you're starting to look at not just the impact that you can have on society from a how far forward can I get, and can I keep up with the Joneses and that kind of thing. And you start to think about how you can be a really positive contributor to society and positively impact those around you in a sustainable way. I think the organisations that have really nailed a statement of purpose that that talks not just to the financial intent or the profit intent. And there's lots of research around this as well, but they can have a statement of their purpose in the world and what change they hope to make. I think those organisations are shown to be the most sustainable in terms of growth and also in terms of engagement. So there's there's the enduring aspect of strategy, which is how do we want to change our communities and what impact do we want to have? It's big, impossible chunks, which Marcio from our team likes to refer to as expeditions. So things that challenge the possible, that are not time bound, that they're long-lived things that you're going to chase. And then there's a more actionable aspect of strategy. So in the remote context, you need to be playing both sides of that fence. You need a way to engage a lot of leaders in the conversation around where should we be going, what impact should we be having on the world, where should our focus be. But you also need to have kind of the short-term cadenced activities, which is, well, what are the next actionable steps to get there, and how are we going to measure whether we are moving in the right direction on that journey. And maybe that's a good time for Dave to step in, because he's just been doing
it. So what we've been doing recently is taking those actionable pieces and running through what we call our all hands planning pattern. And really it breaks down into two key parts. The first is taking an understanding of what that strategy is, so the overarching goal or the overarching action or objective that you're trying to achieve, so that's short-term piece, and starting to incept onto that about what is actually involved in doing that. So the same as you would do an inception on a feature or an epic, if you're working with a team, or you're incepting on a project kickoff, same sort of idea, run slightly differently, but running that inception at that strategic level to understand, well, what do we need to do this? What are the component parts that we need to deliver to actually make that up? Once we get that, then basically we run through that as many strategic pillars or objectives that we need to achieve. And fundamentally, the outcome of that is you've started to understand the work that you need to do. So the actual actionable pieces that the team's going to start consuming at a higher level to start delivering and actually achieving your outcomes, the objectives that you're setting. We take that then as input that flows into our all hands planning, and that's our planning with the teams, big room, planning at scale process pattern that we use. So it's the teams then working, setting the context. So we get the leaders together, set the business context, set the understanding of why we're trying to achieve the objectives, and then use the teams to really start taking that work, breaking it down into the smallest chunks, understanding where our release cadences are, understanding when we start to deliver the value in a online mass collaboration planning session. From that, then obviously we get our outcomes. We get the plan. A plan's only as good as how well you maintain it. So we want to understand dependencies. We want to understand how their work tracks. But I think it was General Patton. One of my favorites, I think it is a plan's only as good until the first bullet's fired. So we've got a plan. That's great. It's fantastic. We've got a plan for the next quarter. We recommend you plan it on quarters. On cadence each quarter, just because that's the most logical thing, and that gives you opportunity. If you're setting targets too far in the future, your horizons are too far away, your market's going to change. But obviously you can shift that as well. So if you need to bring it faster, then you can bring it faster. It's just a cut down version. But then it becomes now I've got a plan and I'm delivering it. How do I track it? How do I manage it? How do I maintain it? And what do I need to do to make sure that plan stays healthy? And we take that as output, as that input back in through the virtual obeyer. So all levels of our organization, the team, what we call the team of teams, and the enterprise are actually in a consolidated point, actually able to see the health of the work, the health of their plan, the health of the delivery, but the health of their teams, the health of their strategy as it's being delivered. And they're actually able to make those micro adjustments to it as they need. So the cadence gives us the opportunity to change. The teams have alignment, and we create that understanding the whole way through the inception and all hands planning process. And then we feed that back to all levels via what we call our virtual obeyer. So we're actually able to capture that information, capture that data, and use data to inform the decisions to make the adjustments that we need to. And then we do it obviously on that sort of quarterly cadence, so we don't have long planning horizons. Yeah.
All right. Any feedback that you guys have received so far working this way through the RAF, or from your current customers that you'd like to share? Maybe some sort of direct, indirect feedback, or something that you've seen it working really well, or some challenges that you have gone through in recent months with your clients.
Look, we've got some really strong feedback. I have recently, which is lovely. I always like really good feedback when we come back from our clients. Transparency is the first one. It's just for, I think Andrew mentioned earlier, for agile organizations that have jumped and they move to a remote setting, it's actually a lot easier for them. A lot of the things are there, and their people adapt pretty quickly. One of the companies I've been working for recently is not so agile. They're more traditional. The level of transparency, the level of the discussion, the level of engagement, but the level of collaboration has been a huge call out. And they've got a lot out of the process. So if a very mature agile organization looked at it, they would probably go, well, you're missing some steps here. But for that organization, they have come so far because of that transparency, which we all know is so important, because of the ability to have the people doing the work involved in planning the work has made a huge benefit for them. The other side, though, is the challenge. They ends up being a lot of work. So and I mentioned this earlier when we talked about the facilitation with Mike's question, to get to that level of transparency, to get to that level of visibility, to get to that level of collaboration, these teams are actually working really hard. They're spending a lot of time on their plans, and they're used to having their plans just given to them, and then they're told, oh, we need this by December, deliver it. And obviously from their perspective that's a lot easier from a planning side, not easy to deliver. And this time we've flipped the switch on them. So they're spending a lot of effort, a lot of energy, a lot of knowledge into planning, which is a lot of work for them. So it's the trade-off. They're getting the great visibility, they're getting the great engagement, they're getting the great collaboration. The trade-off being that we're asking them to do more work in the planning side. So hopefully means that their plan itself is healthier, it's more realistic. They've been challenged the whole way to, can you actually deliver this in the timeframes? And we've given that visibility not just to the teams, but obviously to the senior leaders, because we're feeding back at every point of the process to say, through those obeys, to say, we need to rethink. We've got too much. We need to think a priority. We need to shrink this down, and we need to cut it. So, yeah.
And how do you keep people motivated? Because it seems like sometimes maybe it's a lot of work. Because now, previously, I was going to work maybe 8 hours, 9 hours a day, right? And now there is no time limit, right? Because I'm actually working remote, so I can work anytime. But still, some people actually work in a manner where they are sort of disciplining themselves. Of I need to work only from these hours to these hours. But motivation is obviously a key factor in all of this. And how do you see that working out in a remote working setting like this, or anywhere basically?
So maybe I can kick off with the Blaney there. I've been using our just building team agreements. So we've got when we launch teams, we've got an understanding of our team agreements, where as a team we're coming together to understand the situation that we're in, to understand the context we're working for, to understand preferred working hours. Sometimes it's as simple as that. But the behaviours we're looking for and the engagement we're looking for. So we build team agreements to help people understand and build empathy and build context and build awareness within the team, understand our purpose. People are very easily motivated if they understand and they agree and they're aligned to the purpose. So work that you don't understand why you're doing it and what value it has is very, very, very difficult to be motivated to deliver. But if you're passionate about the work and you understand how that's driving the business forward, so that's that connection again from strategy down to the work, it's much easier to be motivated. From a leadership of that side, so again, when I was launching the team I was working with, just capturing how we're going to communicate, what tools we're going to use, but understanding that we're going to make agreements that we're not going to have 10 hours a day of video conferencing. We're not going to just call a video conference call when we could just use a Slack message or a Microsoft Teams or just an email. Sometimes it's just in an email. So we're making those agreements up front about how we're going to engage with each other. And then ultimately, we just try to make everything as fun as possible, short, sharp, to the point, really hyper focused on value of the conversations and the time we're having together, making sure we all had real clear clarity of purpose of what we were trying to achieve, and then let people self-motivate, self-align around that. But also at the same time, those times were together to make them as fun, as engaging, as collaborative as possible. So using the tools, so someone wasn't just sitting and listening to someone talk, which is ironic because that's what everyone's doing right now, listening to me talk, but having tools, having activities where we were actually combining and collaborating as often as possible. I don't know, Blaney, if you want to add more to that.
Yeah, I think, look, I might have a slightly different perspective because all the data I'm seeing is that teams are more engaged. Mm-hmm. I think, I don't know whether that's going to be sustainably engaged, but certainly at the moment, teams, my personal view on it is that we go to work to achieve things. We don't go to work just to make money. We go to work because we want to make a difference. And I honestly think people are more productive at the moment, and the stats are showing that out. Most of the teams that we work across a lot of companies, the organisations that that elaborate people are working at, the metrics are saying sort of 12 to 16% more productive. So I think someone wrote an article the other day saying that this could be the greatest productivity hack since the addition of women to the workforce. It's a massive thing to make a productivity change of that significance. But it also means that people I'm starting to wonder what I did with my hours in the office. To be perfectly honest, I was in. I worked from Hub one day. I was in Melbourne a few days, and I travelled up the eastern seaboard 1 or 2 days a week. All that time I wasted in planes. All that time I wasted on trains or in the car. And then in the office, it was kind of you get in there, you wander off, you get your coffee, you have a chat with some people, you do some things. I don't have that in a fully remote context. I just get stuff done, and I get a kick out of that.
Yeah.
I mean, that reminds me. Actually, sorry, that reminds me. Like many years ago, we did the lean exercise for one of my clients, and we figured out of all the number of hours, we actually were wasting around 32,000 hours in a year on unnecessary meetings, right? Around which nobody is really required, but the manager or the boss is asking everyone to be in that meeting. And then over 10,000 hours in basically breaks, different sorts of breaks, right? So the productivity is probably maybe at best 25, 28%, right? But yeah, so it's kind of really interesting. So that actually brings me a good point of, how, if we have to summarize, right? If you have to summarize that, how we can be more effective in remote working, what will be the top five points from your point of view?
I'll go with mine first, and then Dave, you can have a crack. So the big one for me is design your operating model to suit the remote working context. Don't lift and shift something that you built because you had 6 floors and you had to munge everyone into a particular format. Don't hold the same lines of authority that you used to. Align teams to value, align authority to value. Really carefully design the interactions between teams, and recognize that you'll have rich communications within the team boundary, but that as you move outside of the team boundary, you're going to have to be pretty explicit about how you make those interactions work. As I said, Team Topologies has some great patterns. We've developed some patterns as well. There's a few different people looking at this stuff at the moment. Get that right. I think that's the number one. Second one, informal networks. You need to be working to make sure that you're replacing some of the things that you get just by virtue of proximity with things that help you to foster the informal networks in the organisation. So whether that's deliberately putting people in different teams to work on things, e.g. Innovation or hack sprints or that kind of thing, or whether you're using, we've got a few things in Remote AF that are just about surfacing a little bit more about the people who you work with to break the ice in conversations and to sort of replace that desk look and feel. There's some really cool tools that are coming out that you can play games and stuff with as well. I think turn-based games are pretty good so that you're not stuck on VCs as well. I also heard that there was an engineering team who was doing all their meetings in Red Dead Redemption 2 recently, which I thought was a cracking idea. Riding along on a horse and chatting to your colleagues. Probably number 3 would be teach your leaders the difference between leading on site and leading remotely. Leaders who've got a tendency to need to control things are really struggling at the moment because they don't have that control tendency is fear related. It's a pattern of behavior that held them back in the office. Now that they haven't got visibility of what's going on, it's becoming more and more overt. So those leaders, you need to put some real time in to help them to understand that that's not a helpful pattern of behavior. It wasn't a helpful pattern of behavior before, but it is a really unhelpful pattern of behavior in the remote context. Number 4, remember that the informal networks in your organization now extend into people's households. So part of my team is Dave's daughter and Dave's missus. Part of Dave's team is my wife, my two kids. It's really important to recognise that you're not just in an office; you're in people's homes, and you need to build respectful working agreements that reflect that reality. And finally, number 5, use Remote AF because it's pretty awesome.
That's a
Sorry,
that's a nice plug-in there.
There's the Aussie larrikin coming through. I've got 5. So the advantage of going second is you get time to prepare. The disadvantage, Andrew says them all. No, for me, the first, it's purposeful design. It is, you have to think of everything and design it in such a way that it works for a remote setting or a hybrid setting or a distributed setting. So that if that's your ops model, if that's the way you run your workshops, if that's the way you run your daily stand-up, take advantage of the strengths that remote working gives us, and do what you can to minimize and mitigate the challenges that are associated to it. The second point for me is take advantage of asynchronous and synchronous. Remote working gives people the opportunity to work the hours they want around their lives. So if you're at home and you're caring for your kids because you're in lockdown like I am in Melbourne, and you're homeschooling, then that's okay. Work around the times that you're available. Remote working gives us that opportunity. And if we've got a culture in our team that is supportive of that, and I'll come to culture next, then that's great. So take advantage of asynchronous and synchronous. Use your time together in such a way that it's beneficial to discussion. Minimize it as much as you can, and just do as much asynchronously as possible. You'll make people's lives a lot better. It gives people control, and giving people control gives people empowerment. Giving people empowerment makes them enjoy their jobs. My third one is tools are awesome. Use them. There's so many great ones out there. There's some very cool ones. So try different ones. Have a lot of fun with it. I've got a friend who once a week, every week at his daily stand-up just dresses up for the sheer fun of it. He gets his wife involved. He dresses up as a lion and pretends he moves all the plants in front of his laptop, and then he pretends he's David Attenborough. Stuff like that. Like, use the tools, have fun with it, because that's going to bring us closer together. Which brings me to culture. The fourth one for me is culture is king. It's the same in the office, but it's massive in a remote setting. You have to manage and maintain and look after your culture every day, all the time, in every way possible. And that's just not from a teaming perspective. That's your behaviours that you are and are not willing to accept, how you engage, how you treat each other, being sympathetic, leadership, understanding that leading in a remote setting is different. So you have to take that on board. And as Andrew said, we're in people's homes now, which means that their culture, their nationality, their religion is all part of the cultural setting now. When we're in the office, the culture was just the office culture. It's not the case anymore. So you need to be aware of it. You need to be sympathetic to it. You need to be empathetic to your team and the challenges that they've got, and you have to maintain that culture. And my last one, we have a saying within Remote AF is silos in the office become chasms in a remote setting. You have to concentrate on alignment. If you've got an operating model where you're handing things over, probably that wasn't working so well. I think at the start I mentioned that the space I worked in, I was used to work being handed over to us from the delivery teams. If you've got an operating model that's working that way, it's going to really struggle in a remote setting. So alignment, bringing teams closer together, working on those interactions between them become really critical, because you are delivering value across your organization. It takes a lot of teams and a lot of people within your organization to deliver value, not just delivery space. And you need to make sure you include them the whole way through your process, because that's going to be much better for the outcome for the business, not just for the people. So they're my 5.
Perfect. Sees this brilliantly put together, both of you. And I think we had a great discussion on the remote part of it. So, I mean, in the end, I would like to say that through remote working, you have the opportunity to revolutionize your way of working, right? And how you can operate your business much better, especially if you look at RAF as well. So given this, I think we're running out of time, and I would love to learn more about it. Where people can learn more about remote AF.
Yeah, it's, so visit the website, www.remoteaf.co. I think we've got a Twitter account. We've got LinkedIn. We're at the early stages of this. We've just signed up 20 amazing people as early adopters across 9 countries. We're kind of pausing new subscriptions for the time being while we prepare to scale, but we anticipate in October, November that we'll be running several training courses and really scaling this out and starting to take it to the world. We think that if we do this well, we can keep people working flexibly. We can have a significant environmental impact, and hopefully have some really other positive impacts on the bottom line, on communities, and just on the way that we interact as humans. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Perfect. Cool. Thanks very much, guys. And thank you for being on Business Agility Live. And I wish you all the best with your remote agility framework as well as remote working. And I hope we can bring you guys back again after some successful stuff and after things actually settle down in next few months. All right. Thanks very much, guys.
Take care.
Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.